Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, and welcome back to The Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me on this episode. I think it's just so nice that you have opened up your phone, or whatever, logged into your phone, did the little passcode, and said, hey, I think I'm going to listen to Christine talk for a couple minutes. I don't know about you, but I used to, when I was a kid, watch Clarissa Explains It All on Nickelodeon. It was on, I think, around the same time as Salute Your Shorts and Hey Dude and Pete and Pete. I think they're all great shows now. I don't know. Well, that's not true at all. I haven't watched them in a few decades. But every time that Clarissa would talk straight into the camera, I used to do that in the bathroom mirror until I got caught by my older brother. So this is as close as I can get to reliving my Clarissa hopes from long, long ago. But speaking of television, that is what we're going to talk about today. Or at least movies, television, magazines, media in general. What made me think about this, magazines, media in general. What made me think about this is the other day, it was my husband's and mine, my wedding anniversary. And so we were very nice. We're very lucky to have my in-laws agree to watch the kids for a few hours. And we decided what we wanted to do was go to the movie and go to dinner. And the movie that we saw was Shaw and Hobbs and Shaw. I can't think of which. I think it's Hobbs and Shaw, actually, with The Rock and Jason Statham. I don't know if you've seen the previews for that or if you saw it yourself, but it's just like a reboot of the Fast and Furious franchise. So absolutely not at all romantic or something you'd think a couple on their wedding anniversary would go to see, but that is what we did. And it was a joint idea. My husband said, hey, you want to go see this? And I said, absolutely, I do. I actually, after years of leading love life, or relationship life in general, just having one failed relationship after another, and also realizing the amount that romantic comedies and romantic movies, the kind of influence it had on my life and the way I thought about things and people, has made me pretty jaded about any kind of movie that has romance as its baseline plot. Anecdotally, there is research, which we'll talk about, but for me personally, I was typically a person who was very, very influenced by media, friends' opinions, the surrounding society and culture, you name it. Somebody could say, and I would like to say that that stopped when I became an adult, but it didn't. This continued on probably until, a few years into parenthood, especially when it came to the faith. And now I don't really give a rat's behind about what the culture at large would think. And I just focus on what our blessed Lord would think. But before that, even when I remember telling my boss when I was still working at an office job that I was pregnant with our first child. And up until that point, it was during our annual review, and she had been saying, this next year, let's gear you up for management. I think you're going to go places. And I said, that all sounds great, but I am going to have to be out on maternity leave after October. And her whole demeanor changed. And she said, oh, well, all right, we'll see when we get there then, because a lot of women, after they have their first child, they're just not as interested in careers anymore. And that one small thing, which there's a more of a history with this particular manager, for better said, really stuck with me. And I let it influence me in a very negative way. And I just assumed, oh, well, now I am a mom. I guess I just don't care about my career. And I really stopped trying at work. I feel bad for my coworkers that had to deal with me at the time. It's pushed me into a darker place. So this isn't like this was something that was just affecting me as an adolescent. I'm a sensitive person, and I historically and relatively recently, in the past, that was only 6 years ago, still had trouble with being influenced by things that were said to me or things that I saw. That includes movies. Now, I grew up not watching cable TV until about the age of 12 or 13. I remember the day we got cable, I was homesick, and it just so happened my parents surprised us with cable TV. But my brother being older than me, 4.5 years older than me, some of the first things that we watched were not wholesome, and my parents didn't really know either, so it was MTV. Which, going from not seeing any of that kind of stuff to being 13 and watching music videos in the 90s, I can't say that was particularly wholesome. I mean, even something as, I'm looking back, Fiona Apple's Criminal video. I can still see that in my mind. It just looks so trashy and, leftovers from the party the night before, and the lyrics are really suggestive to Prodigy's Firestarter. I remember that one really scarring me. That scared me, I think. But then also that besides MTV, up until that point, until the age of 13, I didn't really watch movies that were any newer than like 1960. We were just a family that loved to watch old movies together. And even still, one of my all-time favorite movies is from the 30s called The Philadelphia Story. When I went over to friends' houses, or we watched newer things at our house like Star Wars or The Princess Bride. I should say newer. It was newish in the 90s. But at friends' houses, who knows what I would see? Dazed and Confused, Cruel Intentions, lots of drug and alcohol and casual sex. And these things did affect me. And I remember one of the first times that I was separated for any length of time from typical movies, because I do love watching movies. Many typical movies, from reading typical teen or 20, 30-something magazines like Self or Women's Health or whatever, was when I took a trip to Italy with a friend of mine back in 2004. And so for about 3 weeks, I did not watch TV. I didn't really even look in a mirror. I wasn't reading any magazines, didn't bring any music with me, just kind of immersed myself in whatever we were doing. Didn't bring any music with me, just kind of immersed myself in whatever we were doing when traveling. And I remember at some point on the trip how good I felt about myself, because up until that point I had a history with eating disorders, a history of pretty low self-esteem. And when I came back from that trip, it didn't change. I went right back to watching, well, not right back, but in a short time, the old habits came back of watching regular, movies and watching cable TV and Sex and the City, because we got HBO at some point too. And reading the typical magazines, anything from Cosmopolitan to Women's Health. And nothing changed. It was a short time, though. There was this moment where I thought, oh, wow, I actually like myself. I'm not thinking that I'm fat, or I'm not thinking that I'm not cool enough. And it was really liberating, but it was such a short amount of time. But it still stuck out. And I think that's what brought me to realize that maybe everything that's in the magazines and in TV isn't actually accurate to real life, and it isn't actually an indicator of any sort of health. Another thing that stuck out over time that made me start to realize that maybe all this stuff is just kind of crap is I worked in a day spa as a front of house person, checking clients in. And one of the hairdressers or skincare estheticians or somebody was looking through a magazine, and it was like one of the typical fashion ones. And she went, oh, that's not how you do hair like that. That's so wrong. And I thought to myself, oh, wait, here's a professional hairdresser saying that something that I hold as an authority is incorrect. I wonder if anything else in here is incorrect. And, I think I'm a smart person, but to go all those years just assuming that if something was in print or if something was on TV, that it had accurate and real authority that I should listen to, that went on way longer than it should have. Now, again, I think I'm a smart person. I think I am pretty discerning, and I can be healthily critical of things. But man, it just being exposed to these different types of media as a young adult really affected my way of thinking over time. And it stuck with me even into my adulthood. So these really do have an effect. All of that is, I can say, is anecdotal to me. And I'm sure anybody listening probably has similar experiences with magazines. I recently read, just to go back a step, I recently read The Anti-Mary Exposed by Carrie Gress, and I think it was awesome. I would recommend this to anybody. I love the idea that there is an Antichrist spirit and also a person, and of course there would be an anti-Mary spirit as well, and it is the devil himself playing on the feminine and twisting it into something really horrible. And one of the points in there that really hit home for me, because again, I know now, looking back, of how much magazines and TV and movies and all that stuff had an effect on my life. To hear how in the 80s, Cosmo, first of all, was created by someone who wanted to mimic Playboy. So she twisted around this very raunchy, inappropriate publication just for women, and created the Cosmo Girl, which is just a fiction of the writers to promote a lifestyle that is neither pure nor wholesome, nor really anything that is lasting and good. And then also to have all these editors together in the 80s to, including things like Better Homes and Gardens or something, and Red Book. I have to go back and actually look at the list of publications who decided in the 80s to band together and in the same month release articles in their magazines promoting abortion. Like, man, they got together. This was a thing. This is actually a planned out way of disrupting a cultural belief that maybe abortion isn't a good thing and trying to make it mainstream and totally acceptable. These were thought out strategies that have affected millions of lives, and I'm sure have affected and is continuing to affect millions of women's lives even now. So it's, really listening to and what you're reading and what you're watching, this stuff actually matters. So before, I've gone off with enough of the anecdotal stuff. Again, I'm sure that anybody listening has similar stories or tidbits or feelings about all of this. I still cannot watch romantic comedies. It still bugs me because they show, just even looking back at, Can't Hardly Wait. So I can't, when I came of age, Can't Hardly Wait, She's All That, all these like coming of age, high school graduation type movies were coming out. And seeing and then Real World and Road Rules and all these MTV shows about young late teens and early 20-somethings getting together and living in a house and doing wild stuff, like all this stuff. I thought, oh, okay, that's just what I am meant to do. That's what people do. People talk about how great college is. This must be why, because it's a similar experience. But I still am so jaded because the movies that I watched as I came of age really did make me make really bad decisions, very irresponsible decisions. I hurt a lot of people by being so callous, just thinking, oh, this is just the way things are. You don't like it? You don't like that I am engaging in a casual relationship with you? Then, well, it's your fault. You just got to get with the times. Now, I can't say that it's just movies that were made or TV shows of the past few decades that caused me to think like this. Again, up until the age of 12-ish, I watched predominantly movies from the 1930s to the 1950s. And even after that point in time, even when I was starting to watch other movies like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or Charlie's Angels or whatever, watching shows like Sex and the City, we still watched a lot of those old black and white movies. So they don't get off scot-free either because they showed a relationship between a man and a woman that progressed very quickly. These movies, it could be one day. It happened, It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, I think. I think it's them. But It Happened One Night. It was where people fall in love overnight. There's so many that just, it would turn around. They'd meet, it would turn around very quickly. And at least at this point, they were still getting married. But even in the marriages, it was this shrugging off of the old standards of having a church wedding and having a courtship. And it was two people meeting, falling in love, and getting hitched at a courthouse as quickly as possible, because we know why, right? It's for a sexual relationship that they were after, not anything truly lasting. So it did show this very quick and almost for somebody. And that became a sexual thing because they got married, and that's what they showed. Hear barking in the background. I think there's a dog in my house barking, and it would be a giant St. Bernard. I think she's done. So those movies don't get off scot-free either. There's just problems with across the board with media influencing, and just because it was black and white from 1940 whatever doesn't mean that at that time, I mean, Hollywood was still Hollyweird, no matter what age and decade it was. They were still influencing how people thought, purposely influencing how people thought, changing the culture. You don't get off scot-free. Whether the movie was made in 1999 or 2019 or 1955, there's still issues with it. And they're still trying to change the mores of the culture. So not all movies were like that, but the romantic comedies or these coming-of-age high school drama things, Cruel Intentions, oh my God, it was terrible. They affect people. So, and it's not just me. As I've said, all of this anecdotal stuff, I want to go through at least two studies that I read that I thought was really, really interesting. So one was published by Psychological Science. This is back a few years. And I was reading a book recently, and 2012 was when the article was published. The research was published. I was reading a book not too long ago, and in the foreword of the book, or the intro, the author said, look, some of these pieces of research that I'm going to include go back a couple decades, but that doesn't mean that they are not still useful. Nobody's done the research since. They're still valid now. Humans haven't changed that much since then. They still have the same good practices or, errors in the research. That has not changed. So it starts off by saying that even though a great deal of research has shown that adolescents who watch more risky behaviors in popular movies like drinking or smoking are more likely to drink and smoke themselves, up until this point, surprisingly, little research has examined whether movies influence adolescent sexual behaviors. Well, lo and behold, what research says. It does. So, over 6 years of research, psychological scientists examined whether or not seeing sex on the big screen translates into sex in the real world for adolescents. And much of the research has shown that the sexual attitudes and behaviors of the adolescents are influenced by the media. I don't think that is anything outrageous. But it's the role of movies that has been somewhat neglected, despite other findings that movies are more influential than TV or music. So movies do influence us more than TV and music does. So what they did is they first looked at the top grossing film from 1998 to 2004. Then they coded the movies for seconds of sexual content like heavy kissing or intercourse. And this also built on previous surveys of movies from the 1950s onward. So in 1950 to 2006, that found more than 84% of the top grossing movies contained sexual content. That included 68% of G-rated films. Isn't that crazy? Over half, almost 70% of G-rated films from during the time period had sexual content in it. 82% of PG movies and 85% of PG-13 movies. PG-13 movies, that's most of what I was watching, and I'm sure most of what young people were watching back then when I was a kid, and even now, 85% have sexual content in them. Then the research recruited over 1,200 participants between the ages of 12 and 14, and each participant reported which movies they had seen from a number of different collections of 50 that were randomly selected. 6 years later, the participants were surveyed to find out how old they were when they became sexually active and how risky their sexual behavior might have been. Did they use condoms consistently? Were they monogamous? Did they have multiple partners? All this sort of thing. Well, the results. Adolescents who were exposed to more sexual content movies start having sex at younger ages, have more sexual partners, and are less likely to use condoms with casual sexual partners. That's from one of the researchers. So, yeah, no kidding. You see this stuff and it normalizes it, right? You see one-night stands, casual hookups, and it starts to normalize all of it. And you start to think, well, okay, I've seen it. It can't be that bad. If it was in a movie, it can't be that bad. So the researchers examined the role of a personality trait called sensation seeking. And this is where they think that why movies have these effects on adolescents. Personality trait called sensation seeking. And this is where they think that why movies have these effects on adolescents. So one of the great dangers of adolescence is this predisposition for sensation-seeking behavior. And between the ages of 10 and 15, adolescents seek more novel and intense stimulation of all kinds, and that's where it peaks. So the wild, hormonal surges of adolescence makes judicious thinking, judicious, I can't say it. You know what I'm trying to say. Sensible thinking, can't say it, but a bit more difficult. Well, I mean, I'm sure we all remember being those ages, or we know kids currently who are those ages, and man, they really have a hard time thinking straight. So the colleagues that got together for this research project found that greater exposure to sexual content in movies at a young age led to a higher peak in sensation seeking during adolescence. So as a result, sensation seeking, try to say that 5 times fast, can last well into the late teens and even the early 20s if people are exposed to these kinds of movies. And then they point out that such sexual exposure in movies tends to activate sensation seeking, both because of biology and the way that the boys and girls are socialized. So seeing the sexual behavior in movies coupled with hormonal changes, the sensation seeking proclivity, it kind of just blends together and creates this maelstrom of poorly thought out sexual behavior. And, with the horrible mass shootings over the past, week and a half, 2 weeks have shown, and I really admire people who have come out and said, have made this point in particular, that it's not so much the person themselves. How do I put this? I'll just try to put it the way they put it. There's something missing. Christ is missing. Spirituality is missing in ourselves and in our culture that creates this hollowness where people fill it with these horrible things. And if you have a very influential, money-making industry that commands a lot of attention and, for better or for worse, respect from the culture at large, and you have this industry filling a void that the church isn't, you're bound to come up with these really poor moral choices, like having sex too young and with and out of wedlock. Okay, so let's see. The researchers also speculate, so we'll go back to this research real quick, that adolescents learn specific behaviors from the sexual messages in movies. Many adolescents turn to movies to acquire, quote, sexual scripts that offer exaggerated emotional situations. For 57% of American adolescents between the ages of 14 and 16, the media is their greatest source of sexual information. And they often don't differentiate between what they see on the screen and what they must confront in daily life. So there's a void. Adolescents are looking for a way to fill it and figure out answers to their questions, and to wrestle with the hormonal changes that they're going through, and the media fills that void. Okay, so that's one. That's movies and sexual behavior. Another one I just want to briefly talk about is the magazine's influence. This is more in terms of body dissatisfaction, and you'd have to be dumb, deaf, and blind to, over the past few years, to not hear the research saying that, or people complaining that models are there's airbrushing, and Photoshop is getting ridiculous. This is unhealthy. You're promoting an unhealthy standard. Absolutely true. But then, as a countermeasure, we go on the opposite end of the spectrum, and we're trying to say that somebody who is morbidly and medically obese is somehow healthy too, and that's actually impossible. It's just, if a person is morbidly obese, they are at a greater risk for every health problem under the sun, and are a greater risk for death. I mean, it's science. So either way, whether we are promoting super, super anorexic skinny people or people who are clearly having issues with self-control or medical conditions and they're morbidly obese, that is they're both unhealthy. Now, okay, so reading fashion magazines has been shown to correlate positively with body dissatisfaction. We say positive, correlate positively with body dissatisfaction. We say positively, that means that reading fashion magazines did make people more dissatisfied with their bodies. And if you, even with health magazines, so Self or Women's Health or anything that promotes healthier attitudes or fitness and workout ideas and better nutrition, if you really like those magazines and you're very committed to believing in those magazines, the research has shown you are also more likely to experience high levels of body dissatisfaction. So no, it doesn't matter what's the content, even if it promotes a healthy lifestyle. If you are really engaged with that magazine, you are also more likely to experience body dissatisfaction. That is absolutely where I would have fallen into when I used to read these magazines. And I bring this up to say that, yes, magazines also have a very high level of influence and effect on readers. Whether you are an adolescent or in health magazines, it's not just for teens that it's looking at, it's for grown-ups as well. So even if you are a grown-up watching crap on TV or at the movies, or you're reading these magazines, you can still be influenced by all of this stuff. It normalizes a behavior and an attitude that is just not healthy for your body, soul, mind. Absolutely not healthy. Okay, so you heard my anecdotes. I talked about the research a little bit. Well, that leaves us with what the heck are you supposed to do? As grown-ups, and if we don't have, let's just say as grown-ups for ourselves personally, what you can do if you notice that you are still watching all these things and feel a dissatisfaction about your life or yourself, one thing I would highly suggest is just getting rid of it. Find something else. I guarantee that if you have time to read a magazine or watch a movie, then you also have time to read a magazine or watch a movie, then you also have time to maybe switch and watch EWTN or an awesome Catholic YouTube video person. Or you could read the Catholic Catechism or any number of the Theology of the Body. That would be a great place to start if you haven't read that or it's been a while. Theology of the Body. You could read about liturgical living. You could read about a miracle like Bonnie Engstrom's, her son. Her book just came out and I cannot think of the name of it. 61 minutes to a miracle. I have to look it up. But if you have time to watch crap TV and you have time to read not very productive magazines or books, because certainly there are, I mean, if you're reading like 50 Shades of Grey, you're not either. Exercise that muscle a little bit. And understand like, oh, okay, I just want to relax. I don't want to think too much. There are plenty of things that you can watch that are still wholesome, not even just like Catholic TV, that are wholesome, that can help you relax, that doesn't involve, reshaping your brain and filling it with junk. So take an audit, see what you have been watching and see what you could get rid of and what you're okay with getting rid of. Because even as an adult, this stuff, it doesn't do you any good. You're just filling your brain with junk. And man, can you imagine getting to the end of your life and you've got to try to explain that to God? Well, no, Lord, I didn't really want to read about the real teachings of the Catholic Church just because I wanted to watch Netflix. Which actually, don't watch Netflix because you should boycott Netflix and you should cancel your subscription because I don't want this to be forgotten. There's still a petition going out that I created a couple months ago because they said that they were going to fight the heartbeat law in Georgia. So don't patronize Netflix because they are going to use some of that money to legally fight against a pro-life law in the United States. So get rid of Netflix. That should be number one. So maybe for Amazon, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully they don't get too political. But, watch something that's actually useful, something that's nice, something that's good. Even tough movies. It doesn't have to be all like sunshine and roses. There are even tough movies that are that still have really good Christian themes in them. I don't. The only one that's coming to mind right now, which doesn't really help, but the only one that's coming to mind is True Grit. That's a great one from the Coen brothers. Man, they have some of their movies actually dive very deeply into some good Christian themes. My husband just watched Logan, which is the kind of the ending story of Wolverine, and he said it was obscenely violent. I don't remember it from a couple years. Obscenely violent. I don't remember it from a couple years ago. It had a lot of Christian moral themes to it. So you don't have to watch just sunshine and roses stuff and feel good stuff all the time. You can watch deeper, darker things that are definitely adult-minded, oriented, without diving into just pure drivel. So be more discerning with what you read, or what you watch, what you listen to. Think about it, because even if, and then of course, if there are kids around, the music that you're listening to, again, this all normalizes this behavior and these thought patterns that if it is in publication, if it manages to get on TV, if it's on in the movie theaters, if it's on the radio, then it lends to it an authority that someone may take as a real role model when it absolutely should not be. All right, so now if you have kids, I still have very young kids. I can very easily dictate what we watch and what we don't watch, and I do, especially nothing intelligent to it. We just I'm not going to tolerate that. We turn that off. We find something else that actually makes them maybe think a little bit and isn't just annoying. But if you have teenagers, well, one is, having family movie nights that actually have good movies. So you're together and at least your kid is seeing that the people in their lives, they're grown up, they're moms and dads, grandparents, whatever, do hold a higher standard to what they watch. And maybe eventually they'll come back to that. And also exposing your kids to catechetical teaching as early as possible. Having them read Theology of the Body is a great way to start. Making sure that they understand the catechism and why Catholics believe the things that they do, so that they have reason behind all of it and they're not just being consumed by any emotional attachments to things. It's never too late to start doing this, even if you have kids that are, running off, give them books, have them read, have discussions. Don't be afraid to do that. So, and you should lead the way too. Lead by example. Okay, so that's it for me for today. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or any feedback, you can go to Instagram and find me at The Catholic Mama, or you can go to thecatholicmama.com/contact, and there's a form there that you can fill out and submit a message or a question, and I will be happy to read it. And if it's a question, I'll try to answer it on an upcoming episode. I love hearing from you guys. It's really nice to know that there are ears on the other end of this recording. Okay, until next time. Oh yeah, and please subscribe and leave a nice review because it makes my day. All right, thank you so much. Until next.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.